I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, city council members, local reporters, and my own employees. They were all clapping. Standing next to me, wearing a suit that cost more than my first truck, was my son-in-law, Greg. He was smiling that perfect white-toothed smile of his, clapping the loudest of them all. He thought this was his moment. He thought I was about to announce my full retirement, handing over the keys to the kingdom I'd spent 40 years building with my own 2 hands. He thought he had won. I looked down at the speech he had written for me. It was full of pretty words about passing the torch and new eras. Then I looked at the manila folder sitting underneath it. Greg didn't know about the folder. He didn't know that inside were bank statements, forged signatures, and a sworn affidavit from a man Greg thought he had paid off. I gripped the sides of the podium until my knuckles turned white. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from nerves, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. I leaned into the microphone. The crowd went silent. Greg nodded at me encouragingly, like you would to a confused child or a senile old man. That nod sealed his fate. I wasn't going to read his speech. I was going to burn his life to the ground. But before I tell you how that morning ended, and trust me, the look on his face is something I'll take to my grave, you need to understand how a man I treated like a son tried to steal my legacy, my money, and even my own sanity. If you believe that loyalty still means something in this world, and that traitors deserve exactly what they get, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see how an old dog teaches a young wolf a lesson he'll never forget. Now, let's get into it. Looking back, the warning signs were there long before that morning on the stage. If I had been paying attention instead of grieving my wife, I might have seen the knife coming before it was buried in my back. But I didn't. I was too busy trying to keep my promise to Sarah. I'm Frank Sterling. For 40 years, my name has been stamped on concrete and steel all over Pittsburgh. I didn't go to business school. I didn't have an MBA. I started Sterling Construction with a beat-up Ford pickup, a shovel, and a willingness to outwork every other guy on the block. I built this company on handshake deals and looking a man in the eye. In my world, your word is your bond. If you break it, you're nothing. That's how I was raised, and that's how I ran my business. Until 4 years ago. That was when I lost Sarah. Cancer is a thief. It steals your time, your joy, and eventually it steals the only person who truly knows you. When she passed, a part of me went into the ground with her. Sarah was the soft heart to my hard head. Before she died, she grabbed my hand. Her grip was so weak by then, and made me a promise. "Take care of Jessica," she whispered, "and give Greg a chance. He's family now." Jessica was our only daughter. I loved her more than life itself, but she had a blind spot the size of Texas when it came to men. She married Greg Vance 5 years ago. Greg was everything I wasn't. He was polished, educated, and smooth. He could talk for an hour without saying a damned thing. He wore Italian loafers to job sites where men were wearing steel-toed boots. He talked about synergy and optimizing workflows, while I talked about pouring concrete and meeting deadlines. But I honored my promise to Sarah. When the grief hit me hard, I stepped back. I didn't retire exactly, I just faded. I stayed the chairman, kept my 51% ownership, but I let Greg take the CEO title. I let him run the day-to-day. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was securing Jessica's future. For the first few years, things seemed fine on the surface. The checks cleared, the projects got finished. Greg would come to my house every Sunday for dinner, bringing expensive wine, telling me how great the numbers looked. "We're up 12% this quarter, Frank," he'd say, flashing that smile. "The new software is really streamlining costs." I'd nod, sip my coffee, and try to ignore the gut feeling that something wasn't right.
You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you just know something is off, even if you can't see it? That's how I felt every time Greg talked business. I started spending my days tinkering in my garage, restoring an old '69 Mustang. It was easier than going into the office and feeling like a dinosaur. Greg had replaced my old office staff, good women who'd been with me for decades, with young kids who stared at their phones and didn't know a Phillips head from a flathead. "It's just modernization, Frank," Greg had told me when I complained. "We need to be lean." I hated that word. Lean usually meant cutting corners. But I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to cause friction. I didn't want to upset Jessica. She seemed happy. She was driving a new Mercedes Greg had bought her, talking about vacations to Europe. I told myself I was just being a grumpy old man who couldn't keep up with the times. I told myself Greg was smart, just different. But then came the whispers. It started small. Old friends in the industry would call me to catch up, and there would be a pause in the conversation, a hesitation. "Hey, Frank, I saw Greg at the country club dropping serious cash on a poker game. Business must be booming, huh?" Or, "Frank, I heard Sterling Construction is using a new lumber supplier from out of state. Something wrong with the local boys?" I brushed it off. I defended him. "Greg knows what he's doing," I'd say. I was protecting him. I was protecting the lie because the truth was too uncomfortable to look at. I didn't want to admit that maybe, just maybe, I had handed my life's work to a shark. But you can only ignore the smell of smoke for so long before you have to admit the house is on fire. And the spark that burned it all down didn't come from a spreadsheet or a bank statement. It came from the mud. It was a Tuesday morning, raining just enough to make your joints ache, at least joints as old as mine. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a lukewarm cup of coffee and a crossword puzzle I didn't care about. The house was too quiet. It had been too quiet for 4 years. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10 in the morning. 10 years ago, I would have been knee-deep in mud at a job site, shouting orders and checking levels. Now, I was waiting for the mailman. I felt useless, and to a man like me, feeling useless is worse than being dead. That's when the phone rang. It wasn't the house line, it was my cell. I picked it up, squinting at the screen. It was Mike Kowalski. Mike and I go back 35 years. He started as a laborer hauling bricks and worked his way up to site foreman. He's the kind of guy who can look at a wall and tell you if it's 1/8 of an inch out of plumb without a tape measure. He's loyal, honest, and stubborn as a mule. We hadn't talked much since Greg took over. Greg didn't like Mike. He called him rough around the edges and resistant to change. I knew what that meant. Mike didn't kiss Greg's ring. "Hello?" I answered. The line was crackly, background noise of heavy machinery and rain. "Frank, it's Mike. Look, I probably shouldn't be calling you. Greg gave strict orders that all comms go through the project managers now." Mike's voice was tight. He sounded pissed. "To hell with orders," I said, sitting up straighter. "What's wrong, Mike?" There was a pause. "It's the Riverside project, Frank. The foundation pour. You need to see this. I'm not signing off on it. I don't care if he fires me. I'm not putting my name on this garbage." My chest tightened. The Riverside project was a massive commercial complex near the water. It was the biggest contract we currently had. If the foundation was bad, the whole thing was a ticking bomb. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. I grabbed my keys and my old hard hat from the hook by the door. It felt good to have a purpose again. I took my truck, my 10-year-old Ford F-150, not the luxury sedan Jessica kept trying to get me to buy. When I pulled onto the site, things looked different. The site wasn't clean. There was trash piled up near the fencing. The guys weren't moving with the same hustle I used to demand. It looked sloppy. I parked and saw Mike waiting by the wet concrete. He looked tired. He walked over, didn't smile, just shook my hand. "Thanks for coming, boss," he said. He still called me boss. "Show me," I said. Mike led me to the fresh pour. It was setting, but even to the naked eye it looked wrong. The color was off, too light. We spec'd this for 5,000 psi high-strength mix.
Mike said, kicking the formwork. This is soup. I did a slump test. It failed. This is residential driveway grade, Frank. Maybe 3,000 psi if we're lucky. You put a steel structure on this, it'll crack in 5 years, maybe less. I stared at the gray sludge. My blood started to boil. In construction, you can cut costs on paint, you can cut costs on landscaping, but you never, ever cheat on the foundation. That's not just bad business, it's criminal. Maybe the supplier mixed up the order, I suggested, trying to give the benefit of the doubt, though I didn't believe it. That's what I thought, Mike spat, until I saw the delivery ticket. The driver said this is exactly what was ordered. Stop. I need you to understand something right now. This wasn't just about bad concrete. This wasn't a simple mistake. In my business, cutting corners on a foundation is like packing a parachute with dirty laundry. People die when buildings collapse. I built my name on safety. And standing there in the rain, looking at that pathetic excuse for a foundation, I realized something dark was happening in my company. What I was about to find in that trailer wasn't just incompetence, it was a weapon that would eventually be aimed right at my head. "Where's Greg?" I asked, my voice low. "Golfing," Mike said, or a client lunch, who knows? I nodded. "I'm going to the trailer. Keep the guys working on the perimeter, but don't pour another drop of this slop." I marched to the site office, a double-wide trailer sitting on blocks. I still had my master key. I prayed Greg hadn't changed the locks yet. The key turned. The door opened. The office was empty, smelling of stale coffee. I went straight to the filing cabinet where the site invoices were kept. Greg preached about a paperless office, but the law required physical copies of certain site documents to be kept on location. I flipped through the folder marked Materials, Foundation. I found it, the invoice for today's pour. I pulled it out and held it up to the light. The header read, Vance Logistics and Supply. I frowned. I knew every supplier in Pennsylvania. I had never heard of Vance Logistics. And then I looked at the amount, $42,000. That was the price for the premium, high-strength concrete we were supposed to be using. But I looked at the delivery ticket stapled behind it, the one from the actual truck that delivered the mud. It was from Tri-State Concrete, a budget supplier I stopped using years ago. The ticket listed Standard Residential Mix. Cost $18,000. I did the math in my head. $42,000 billed to Sterling Construction, $18,000 paid to the actual supplier, $24,000 of difference on one pour, just one. And the check for the full $42,000 had already been cut and authorized by Greg Vance. Vance Logistics, I whispered to myself. It wasn't subtle. It was arrogant. He was billing his own company for premium materials, buying garbage materials, and pocketing the difference. He was gutting my buildings and stuffing his pockets with the insulation. I sat down in the creaky office chair, staring at that piece of paper. My hand was shaking, not from age, from fury. He wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing my reputation. He was risking lives for a quick buck, and he was doing it using the name I built, while my daughter sat at home thinking he was the perfect husband. I folded that invoice and shoved it into my inside jacket pocket, right next to my heart. It felt heavy, like a lead weight. I walked back out into the rain where Mike was waiting. He looked at me, rain dripping off the brim of his hard hat, expecting an explosion. I didn't give him one, not yet. "Mike," I said, my voice steady, "bury this foundation. Do it today, but mark the location on the as-built drawings. We're going to have to tear it out later." Mike's eyes widened. "Tear it out? Boss, that's 50 grand in labor and materials." "Do it," I ordered. "And Mike, not a word to Greg. If he asks, tell him the pour went fine. Tell him it's curing beautifully. Can you do that for me?" Mike looked at me for a long second, then nodded. "I'd lie to the Pope for you. but you better know what you're doing." I climbed back into my truck, but I didn't go home. I looked at the address listed under Vance Logistics on the invoice, 4200 Oak Street, Suite B. I knew this city like the back of my hand. Oak Street wasn't an industrial park. It wasn't a warehouse district. It was a rundown strip of shops on the edge of town. I drove there, my wipers slapping a rhythm against the windshield. When I pulled up, my suspicions were confirmed. Suite B wasn't a logistics hub. It was a mailboxes and more storefront, sandwiched between a vape shop and a struggling dry cleaner. There were no trucks, no inventory, just a wall of rented metal boxes. I sat there in my idling truck, staring at that storefront. A cold realization washed over me. Greg wasn't just skimming, he had built a ghost company. But what I was about to find inside that mailbox rental place would connect dots I didn't even know existed yet. I'll tell you exactly who I saw walking out of there, but first I had to get to the main office before Greg returned from his lunch. I peeled out of the parking lot and headed for Sterling HQ. It was a glass and steel building I had paid for in cash 10 years ago. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a new girl named Tiffany, looked up, surprised. "Mr. Sterling, we didn't expect you today. Mr. Vance is out." "I know," I said, breezing past her security desk. "Just grabbing some old files, Tiffany. Don't worry about announcing me." I took the elevator up to the executive floor. My old office, now Greg's, was at the end of the hall. I didn't go there. I went to the server room. I might be old and I might not know how to use TikTok, but I know where the bodies are buried in my own company. I also knew that the server room had a physical backup log of all incoming and outgoing emails. Greg had fired my old IT director, but he hadn't changed the keypad code on the door. It was still my birthday, 1956. The lock buzzed, and I stepped into the cool, humming darkness of the server room. I wasn't there to hack anything. I just needed to see the printer logs. Greg was old school in one way. He liked to print things to read them, and the central server kept a PDF copy of every document sent to the executive printer. I sat at the admin console and scrolled through the print history for the last week. Vance Logistics invoice number 104, Vance Logistics invoice number 105. There were dozens of them. HVAC, electrical, drywall. He was subcontracting everything to his shell company. But then I saw a file name that didn't fit. Letter to Investors Final.pdf. I clicked it. It opened on the screen. It wasn't a Sterling construction document. It was letterhead for something called Vance Real Estate Holdings. I read the text and my stomach dropped. It was a panic letter. "Dear investors, due to unforeseen zoning delays, the dividend payments for this quarter will be postponed." I scrolled down. There were replies attached, scanned emails from angry people. One of them read, "Greg, I don't care about zoning. I know you took my money. If I don't have $100,000 back by Friday, I'm going to the district attorney." The date on that email was yesterday. I sat back, the glow of the monitor illuminating the horror on my face. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Greg was running a Ponzi scheme on the side. His real estate ventures were failing, and he was looting my company, my life's work, to pay off his angry investors and keep himself out of prison. He was gutting Sterling Construction and stuffing his pockets with the insulation. I sat down in the creaky office chair, staring at that piece of paper. My hand was shaking, not from age, from fury. He wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing my reputation. He was risking lives for a quick buck, and he was doing it using the name I built, while my daughter sat at home, thinking he was the perfect husband. I folded that invoice and shoved it into my inside jacket pocket, right next to my heart. It felt heavy, like a lead weight. I walked back out into the rain where Mike was waiting. He looked at me, rain dripping off the brim of his hard hat, expecting an explosion. I didn't give him one, not yet. "Mike," I said, my voice steady, "bury this foundation. Do it today, but mark the location on the as-built drawings. We're going to have to tear it out later. Mike's eyes widened. Tear it out? Boss, that's 50 grand in labor and materials. Do it, I ordered. And Mike, not a word to Greg. If he asks, tell him the pour went fine. Tell him it's curing beautifully. Can you do that for me? Mike looked at me for a long second, then nodded. I'd lie to the Pope for you, but you better know what you're doing. I climbed back into my truck, but I didn't go home. I looked at the address listed under Vance Logistics on the invoice, 4200 Oak Street, Suite B. I knew this city like the back of my hand. Oak Street wasn't an industrial park. It wasn't a warehouse district. It was a rundown strip of shops on the edge of town. I drove there, my wipers slapping a rhythm against the windshield. When I pulled up, my suspicions were confirmed. Suite B wasn't a logistics hub. It was a mailboxes and more storefront, sandwiched between a vape shop and a struggling dry cleaner. There were no trucks, no inventory,
he said, his voice smooth but with an edge of razor wire underneath. What on earth are you doing in here? My mind raced. If I showed him the papers now, he'd panic. He'd destroy evidence. He'd lock me out before I could secure the company assets. I needed time. So I did the one thing that hurts a proud man more than anything else. I played the part of the confused old fool he wanted me to be. I slumped my shoulders slightly. I put on a bewildered smile. "Oh, hello, Greg," I said, patting the console. I was looking for those old photos from the '98 Christmas party. Remember? The ones where Mike dressed as Santa? I wanted to show Jessica." Greg stared at me for a long second. He was scanning my face, looking for a lie. Then the tension in his shoulders dropped. He smiled, that pitying, condescending smile that makes you want to punch someone. "Frank," he sighed, stepping inside and taking my arm gently, like I was a toddler wandering near traffic. "We digitized those years ago. They aren't on the server anymore. Come on, you shouldn't be back here. It's a security risk." He led me out into the hallway. "You know," he whispered, leaning in close, "Tiffany said you seemed a little lost when you came in. Maybe you should go home and rest. The stress of the anniversary, it's getting to you." He was already spinning the narrative. He was planting the seeds of my incompetence right to my face. I let him walk me to the elevator. "Maybe you're right, Greg," I mumbled. "I feel a bit tired." As the elevator doors closed, cutting off his smiling face, I straightened my back. The confused old man vanished. The predator returned. I touched the folder inside my jacket. I had him. I met Mike at a diner on the south side, a place where the coffee tastes like battery acid and nobody asks questions. I slapped the folder onto the Formica table. "It's a Ponzi scheme, Mike," I said, keeping my voice low. "He's robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Sterling Construction is Peter." Mike leafed through the emails, his face darkening. "That son of a bitch," he growled. "But Frank, this is just paper. He'll say he was borrowing it. He'll say it's intercompany loans. He's slick." "I know. That's why I need the last piece, the subcontractor." Mike nodded and reached into his work vest. He pulled out a crumpled affidavit. "Way ahead of you, boss. I tracked down the owner of the real premium concrete company, the one Greg supposedly paid 40 grand to. He was not happy to hear his logo was being used on fake invoices. He signed this statement an hour ago. He confirms he never bid on the Riverside job. It's fraud, plain and simple, forgery." We had it all. The fake company, the financial motive, the forgery. It was enough to send Greg to prison for 20 years. But before I went to the police, I had to do the hardest thing yet. I had to tell my daughter. Jessica deserved to hear it from me, not from the 6 o'clock news. I drove to her house that evening. It was a sprawling McMansion Greg had bought with money I now knew was stolen. Jessica answered the door, looking tired. She held a glass of wine. "Dad," she said, not stepping aside to let me in. "Greg said you were at the office today. He said you were acting strange." "I need to come in, Jessie," I said gently. "We need to talk." She hesitated, then let me into the foyer. I didn't waste time. I pulled out the bank statement showing the transfer to the shell company. "Honey, I know you love him, but Greg is in trouble. Bad trouble.
He's been stealing from the company." I expected shock. I expected tears. I didn't expect anger. Jessica's face hardened. She pushed the paper away without looking at it. "Stop it, Dad," she snapped. "Greg told me you'd do this." I froze. What? "He told me you've been paranoid lately," she said, her trembling voice. "He said you're mixing up old contracts with new ones. He said you're forgetting things. Dad, he showed me the emails you sent him last week. Nonsense emails. Gibberish." My blood ran cold. I hadn't sent any emails. Greg had access to my account. He had been planting evidence of my mental decline while I was busy fixing his car engine in my garage. He had been preparing for this moment for months. "Jesse, those are fake," I pleaded. "Look at the bank transfer. Look at the signature." "I'm not looking at your conspiracy theories," she shouted, stepping back. "Greg is working 18 hours a day to save that company because you can't do it anymore, and you repay him by trying to frame him? He's trying to protect your dignity, Dad. He didn't want to tell the board about your condition, but you're forcing his hand." "My condition?" I whispered. "Dementia, Dad," she cried, tears finally spilling over. "He's made an appointment for you with a specialist. Please, just go home." She opened the door and pointed to the street. My own daughter, the girl I taught to ride a bike, the girl I held her hand when her mother died. She looked at me with a mix of pity and fear, like I was a broken thing that needed to be put away. My hands were shaking as I put the papers back in my pocket. I've been hit by steel beams. I've fallen off scaffolding. I've been broke and hungry. But seeing that look in her eyes, that pain, it ripped me apart. I walked to my truck in silence. I felt small. I felt old. But as I turned the key in the ignition, the sadness evaporated. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. Greg had turned my own child against me. He had weaponized her love to protect his lies. That was the mistake that would cost him everything. He thought he had broken me. He thought I would go quietly into the night to protect my dignity. He was wrong. I wasn't going to go home. I was going to war. And what Greg did next, the legal move he pulled the very next morning, wasn't just an attack. It was a declaration that he didn't just want my company, he wanted my life. The next morning, the war arrived at my doorstep in a brown envelope delivered by a courier who wouldn't look me in the eye. I opened it on my porch. It wasn't a birthday card. It was a legal notification from the company's board of directors. Notice of emergency meeting, removal of chairman due to medical incapacity. Attached was a letter from a doctor I'd never met, a Dr. Aris, claiming he had reviewed my medical history provided by my primary caregiver, Greg, and concluded I was suffering from rapid onset dementia. I felt my chest tighten, but this time it wasn't grief, it was pure adrenaline. Greg was moving faster than I expected. He was invoking Article 25 of our corporate bylaws, a clause I wrote 20 years ago to protect the company if I ever got hit by a bus. Now he was using it to cut my throat. But that wasn't the worst part. I went to my laptop to check my accounts, thinking I needed to transfer cash to hire the meanest shark of a lawyer in Pennsylvania. I logged into my personal checking account. The screen flashed red. Access suspended. Contact administrator. I tried my savings. Suspended. I tried the investment portfolio. Locked. I called the bank, my voice rising. "This is Frank Sterling. Why can't I access my money?" The voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. We received a notarized power of attorney document this morning, along with a medical affidavit. Your accounts have been frozen for your protection to prevent erratic spending." I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a crack. I sat there in silence. In the span of 24 hours, he had turned my daughter against me, labeled me incompetent, and locked me out from the fortune I spent a lifetime building. I was a prisoner in my own life. I walked to the window and looked out. A black sedan was parked down the street. It had been there for an hour. Greg was having me watched. He wanted to make sure I didn't do anything crazy. If you've ever felt the walls closing in, if you've ever been cornered by someone you trusted, then you know exactly how I felt in that moment. It makes you want to scream, but screaming is what they want you to do. Silence scares them. I knew I couldn't fight this in civil court. By the time a judge reviewed the medical records and realized they were fake, Greg would have liquidated the company, paid off his debts, and vanished. Or, worse, he'd run Sterling Construction into the ground. I needed a nuclear option. I needed to end this publicly, undeniably, and immediately. I picked up my burner phone, the one Mike had bought me with cash. I texted Mike, one word, green. Then my house phone rang. It was Greg. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Hello? I sounded weak, defeated, exactly how he wanted me to sound.
Greg said. His voice was dripping with fake concern. I heard about the accounts. I'm so sorry it had to come to this. It's just, we can't let you spend your savings on conspiracy theories. We're protecting you. I know, Greg, I whispered. I just feel so confused lately. Maybe you're right. I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. I am right, Frank. Listen, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Commerce Center is tomorrow. It's going to be a big day, lots of press. The mayor is coming. I think it's best if you stay home. We don't want you getting overwhelmed, do we? Jessica agrees. He was disinviting me from the launch of the biggest project in my career. He wanted the stage to himself. He wanted to announce my retirement without me there to object. You're right, I said. I'll stay home. I'll just rest. Good choice, Frank, he said. Get some sleep. We'll handle everything. He hung up, thinking he had won. He thought he had neutered the old dog. He thought I was going to sit in my armchair and watch him dismantle my legacy on the evening news. He was wrong. I wasn't staying home, and I wasn't coming alone. I spent the rest of the day moving like a ghost. I sneaked out the back through the neighbor's yard to avoid the sedan watching my house. I met Mike in the parking lot of a Home Depot. He was standing next to his truck, looking grim. Beside him was a man in a cheap suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. This is Mr. Henderson, Mike said, the owner of the real premium concrete. Mr. Henderson looked nervous. I don't want trouble, Mr. Sterling, but I don't want my company name on a building that falls down. You won't get trouble, I promised him. You'll get justice, but you have to be ready to walk onto that stage when I give the signal. I handed Mike the folder containing the bank records, the fake emails, and the affidavit. Make copies, I said. Make 50 copies. When I start talking tomorrow, I want every reporter, every council member, and every investor to have one in their hands before Greg can cut the microphone. Mike grinned, a mean, sharp grin. It's gonna be a hell of a show, boss. I went back home, sneaking in the same way I left. I sat in my dark living room watching the clock tick. The groundbreaking ceremony was at 10 a.m. Greg would be there in his tailored suit, shaking hands, playing the hero. He had no idea the foundation he was standing on, both literally and metaphorically, was about to crumble. Little did he know, this wasn't just going to be a business meeting, it was going to be an execution. And the man pulling the switch wasn't the confused old invalid he thought he had created. It was the man who built the damn chair he was sitting in. The morning sun was hitting the steel beams of the new Commerce Center skeleton, making them gleam like silver bones. A crowd of about 200 people gathered under the white tent. The mayor was there, shaking hands. Reporters were setting up cameras. And center stage, behind a podium draped with the Sterling Construction banner, stood Greg. He looked every inch the CEO. Tailored suit, perfect hair, radiating confidence. I stood at the back of the tent, hidden by the heavy machinery. I watched him check his watch, smile at Jessica in the front row, and then tap the microphone.
"Ladies and gentlemen," Greg began, his voice booming over the speakers, "today marks a new era for Sterling Construction. As many of you know, my father-in-law, Frank Sterling, is the heart of this company, but even hearts need rest. It is with mixed emotions that I announce Frank's official retirement today, due to ongoing health challenges." The crowd murmured politely. Jessica dabbed her eyes with a tissue. He was doing it. He was burying me alive in front of the whole city. I signaled Mike. He nodded and moved toward the side of the stage with Mr. Henderson. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and walked down the center aisle. My cane tapped rhythmically on the pavement. Clack, clack, clack. Heads started to turn. The murmuring grew louder. Greg looked up, and for a split second, his mask slipped. Panic flashed in his eyes. "Frank," he said into the mic, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a choke. "Well, a surprise appearance. Folks, give it up for the man himself." He started clapping. The crowd joined in. I didn't smile. I walked up the stairs to the podium. Greg met me halfway, grabbing my elbow in a grip that was meant to look supportive, but felt like a vice. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed in my ear, his smile fixed for the cameras. "You're making a scene. Go sit down before you embarrass yourself." "I'm not here to sit, Greg," I said, my voice clear and strong. I pulled my arm from his grip and stepped to the podium. I looked at the crowd. I looked at Jessica, whose eyes were wide with confusion. "My son-in-law says I'm confused," I told the crowd. The silence was instant. "He says I have health challenges, and he might be right, because I'd have to be sick to let a criminal run my company for one more day." Greg lunged for the mic. "Okay, Dad's having an episode. Let's get him some water." "Sit down, Greg," I roared. The command carried the weight of 40 years of commanding job sites. Greg froze. "Mike, now." Mike and 3 of my biggest laborers started moving through the crowd, handing out the packets we had prepared. "What you are holding," I continued, pointing to the papers, "are bank records showing transfers from Sterling Construction to a shell company called Vance Logistics. You'll also find a sworn affidavit from Mr. Henderson. Stand up, Bill." Bill Henderson stood up in the 3rd row. "That man owns the real premium concrete," I said. "Greg Vance forged his signature to buy substandard materials for the building you are standing in front of right now. He pocketed the difference to pay off his personal gambling debts and a failed Ponzi scheme." The crowd erupted. Reporters were frantically flipping through the pages. The mayor looked like he wanted to vanish. Greg's face went from pale to purple. "Lies," he screamed, abandoning the nice guy act. "He's senile. These are forgeries. He's trying to ruin me." He looked at Jessica. "Jess, tell them he's crazy." Jessica stood up. She was holding the packet Mike had given her. She was looking at the bank transfer, the one with Greg's signature, dated the same day he claimed he was at a charity event. She looked at her husband, and I saw exactly the moment her heart broke. Then she looked at me, and she nodded. "It's over, Greg," I said quietly. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. I had called the district attorney's economic crimes unit an hour ago. 2 unmarked cars pulled up right behind the stage. Detectives stepped out. Greg looked for an exit, but Mike Kowalski was standing at the stairs, arms crossed, looking like a brick wall in a safety vest. "Greg Vance," the detective said, walking onto the stage, "we have a warrant for your arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and forgery." As they handcuffed him, Greg didn't look at me. He looked at the cameras, screaming about a conspiracy, about how I was a jealous old man. But nobody was listening. They were looking at the evidence. I walked over to Jessica. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." "I know, baby. I know." It's been 3 months since that day. Greg is currently awaiting trial in the county jail. His bail was denied because of flight risk. Turns out he had a ticket to Costa Rica booked for the day after the ceremony. The lawyers tell me he's looking at 15 to 20 years. The Vance Logistics
Shell company unraveled everything. I didn't retire.
I'm back in the big chair at Sterling Construction, at least for now. We had to tear out the Riverside Foundation. Cost us $500,000, but we did it right. My reputation took a hit, but honesty is the only way to rebuild it. Jessica moved back in with me. She's helping me run the office now, learning the ropes the right way. She's smarter than Greg ever was. She just needed to trust herself. Yesterday evening, I was sitting on my back porch, watching the sun go down over the city. My chest didn't hurt anymore. The silence in the house wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the promise I made her. I protected our daughter. I protected our legacy. It wasn't the way I wanted to do it, but sometimes you have to burn the weeds to save the garden. I'm 68 years old. I've built skyscrapers and bridges, but standing up to the person I trusted most, that was the hardest work I've ever done. And looking at my daughter laughing in the kitchen again, safe and free from a man who saw her as a walking ATM, that's the only paycheck I need. Don't let anyone tell you you're too old or too out of touch or too confused to stand up for what's right. The truth doesn't have an expiration date, and neither does justice. Thanks for listening to my story. If you think Greg got what he deserved, smash that like button and share this video. And if you have a story about a wolf in sheep's clothing in your own family, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. This is John Vengeance signing off. Stay safe, stay sharp, and never let them underestimate you.